So on the previous episode, I mentioned something about David Benavidez and Canelo's personality and their temperament. Not just that, I also try to explain their background and how it may affect the technicalities of how this particular fight is going to go if and when we actually do get a fight between these two men. Now, I'm going to play this video first and I'm going to follow it up with the part two of this particular segment right here. So, inshallah, I hope you guys like and subscribe. And I will continue the show right now with the video that I had dropped earlier today, which was the part one. And it's going to follow up this particular breakdown in which we started with the psychology between these two men. And tonight we're going to end it with their particular skill set and what they can offer, what are some similarities and what are some differences, and how they both fight and how this fight is going to go. And by the way, stay tuned because this may shock you to find out what my particular prediction might be for this fight between them.
David. That's all I gotta
Saying what I said yesterday. Let me see what this is.
All right, so just listening to the world famous boxing voice with none other than Nestor Gibbs. Wanted to give him a shout out because I have called in his show before. So, you got to show love to the channels that show you love and appreciation and whatnot. So now let's talk about the two best 168-pound fighters in the world right now, which is who? None other than Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez. Now, what's great about this fight? I got to tell you, what is even more awesome other than their accolades, the fact that they are both world champions. Obviously, Canelo is more than just a world champion. He's an undisputed champion. And, well, David Benavidez is literally Tom Aspinall. And if you understand MMA, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The guy is an interim champion, not really a real champion, but nonetheless, a championship belt is a championship belt. And they are on a course right now to collide in front of the world to give us another one of the best boxing matches possibly in that particular division, if not the entire sport. So what is significant about David Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez that I can tell you that no other content creator out there will tell you? They're going to talk to you about the kicks and the punches or the technicalities that come along with this fight. They're going to talk about the range of David Benavidez. They're going to talk about the power of both men and how both of their powers are going to translate against each other. So we understand that. I can talk to you about the technical aspects of that, but I want to talk to you about something that can really get your dopamine high when it comes to understanding both of their history. And I think this is where this particular video shines the most. So when you look at Canelo Alvarez, what do you think of him? One of the things that you think about Canelo Alvarez is that he's a redheaded Mexican. What does that even mean in terms of growing up in Guadalajara, Mexico? What does that mean? I'll tell you what that means. For one, you look different than everybody else. You ever lived in a place where you look different than everybody else? Guess what? You're going to have some static. You're going to have fights in your hand. You're going to have people calling you names. You're going to have people doing this and doing that and everything in between. But guess what? It forged you into a tough competitor, just like David Benavidez. What's significant about him? Well, for one, David Benavidez, I got to tell you, was a former 270-pound fat kid during his teenage years. So why is that significant? This brother has some serious chip on his shoulder. And guess what? Fighters who have the biggest chips on their shoulder are usually some of the most motivated psychopaths that you will ever run across. And I don't mean psychopath in a negative way or in a psychological way, but in a way where you are crazy for the sport and you will literally die for it if need be, right? So that's how I'm describing David Benavidez in this sense. Also, you got to take into consideration, Mike Tyson says that one of his favorite fighters right now is none other than David Benavidez. And what a great way to get some sort of legends approval of some sort, right? This is what you get out of Mike Tyson. He's approving you as the man that, well, he favors. Just like what he did when he anointed Tyson Fury. He's like, oh man, there's a 6'9" English guy that's named after me, and his dad was a big fan of mine. Same age as his dad. His dad was going through the same things that I was going through during that time frame. He could relate to that. And there was love for that. And then, of course, there's Francis Ngannou. He had to pick Francis Ngannou over Tyson Fury. And rightfully so. You look at the storyline with Francis Ngannou, the struggles that he had gone through, right? With going through different border customs and then having to sneak into France and living homeless and things of that nature. And the story goes on with Francis Ngannou. But nonetheless, it's great having Mike Tyson approve you. But one of the things that motivates Mike Tyson to being such a big David Benavidez supporter is that he looks at him as someone like himself. Now, is Canelo somebody that Mike Tyson can relate to? Maybe. I mean, yes, both of these guys, like any other fighter out there, you grew up fighting, especially if you come from a rough background like Guadalajara, Mexico, or Brooklyn, where Mike Tyson is from, where he's gotten to a lot of street fights as a kid, and it forged him into the man that he is today as somebody that, well, knows how to trash talk, somebody that knows how to roar up a crowd, how to incite an opponent into anger and into hostilities, which creates big entertainment. So that's Mike Tyson for you in a nutshell. But when you look at Canelo Alvarez, he's no different than David Benavidez as somebody that has something to prove. Now, as I was saying earlier, if you're a ginger Mexican with a Celtic background like Canelo Alvarez living in those parts of the world, you know who that's like? You ever seen the movie Blood In, Blood Out? It was about a movie with these Mexican-American gangsters. One kid was half white, and of course he looked different than everybody else, so he got the stick of it all because of, well, he just looked different than everybody else in the gang. But he proved himself as one of the toughest guys in that gang. And lo and behold, a lot of that comes from the motivation of people doubting you, people looking at you different because you are different. Well, David Benavidez, on the other hand, he wasn't a redhead. He didn't stand out of any particular crowd in his neighborhood or anything like that. Of course, unless we're talking about unless we're talking about the fact that, yes, he was a former fat kid, and guess what? Those things will really drive you into a different stratosphere, especially if you're the type of person that is spiteful, the type of person that wants to prove the critics wrong, wants to prove others wrong, wants to show that you are not that guy that everybody saw you as when you were a fat teenager. So this is the type of psychology that I think is really important understanding these two men. Canelo obviously is a bit of a hothead, right? Back in 2015, I got to tell you, I met somebody at a gym, right? I believe it was a Mexican fella, right? He said he was from Guadalajara, Mexico. And by the way, keep in mind, this was around 2015. So what were we looking at around 2015? Okay, maybe this was 2 years after the Floyd Mayweather fight with Canelo Alvarez. So at the time, yes, Canelo is definitely a famous entity at that point. What else was in 2015? I think right around that time was when he fought, what's that guy's name? Miguel Cotto. Okay, and then when he fought Miguel Cotto, guess what? A lot of people arguably said that, well, Miguel Cotto should have won that fight or did win that fight to a certain degree. Well, here's one thing that I could tell. Yeah, so one thing I could tell you about Canelo Alvarez at that time was that he was getting sued a whole lot, according to this gentleman that I had met at the gym. And again, I don't know this guy from a fly in the wall. I'm just being honest and telling you exactly what type of conversation I had with this guy. And I thought it was quite interesting. He was from Mexico. He said that he knows that Canelo has paid people off, considering that he's always getting into some scuffles and some fights, knocking people out and getting lawsuits and things of his nature. So you got to ask yourself, right? A guy like this, how is he going to, let's say, react to somebody that would agitate him in the ring? Well, how did it work out with, let's say, Floyd Mayweather? Do you think that it affected his performance in that? Oh, yeah, he was missing a whole lot. Floyd was toying with him. And simply because he was able to manipulate his temperament to Floyd's own strategic advantage. So that is what you saw out of Canelo Alvarez. Now, also, what about Bivol, his other loss? Well, here's the thing that you have to understand about Bivol. He was stoic. He didn't have this particular mannerism about him that was flamboyant or boisterous or in the matters of, let's say, maybe a Conor McGregor type of figure to any degree. That's not who Bivol was. What Bivol was just straight to the point. I'm a taller fighter. I'm a rangier fighter. And at this weight class, well, that's where it starts to matter. That's where it starts to matter. That's where the height, that's where the reach, that's where all of these things completely come into play. And now it affected Canelo in a way where, you know what, he didn't adjust to fighting somebody that was not going to stay within his range of, let's say, close quarter combat. And by the way, I'm going to get into that particular segment into the terms of, let's say, the technical breakdowns of it all, right? When you look at this particular fight with Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez, the one noticeable thing that you could say about those two is that they can fight in a very diverse way. Now, obviously, this is a mixed martial arts page, right? So, what exactly do I mean by a diverse way? Because in the mind of a mixed martial artist and as a mixed martial arts fan, and even as a fighter or somebody that is, let's say, just heavily involved in that sport, you're thinking, how can you diverse yourself in boxing when all you're doing is just throwing punches? Well, within the non-deducted view of a boxer, they're going to look at it and say, well, you know what? There's a whole lot that you can learn in terms of the angles of the punches, where you can throw the punches, when and where and how, and all of these things factor into when you throw punches and how you do them. That's boxing in a nutshell. Whereas with MMA, you could get away and disguise punches through kicks and also mix it up with the combinations of, let's say, doing a 1-2 and then shooting for a double leg takedown or something to that extent, right? But with boxing, when I mean diverse, I mean in a sense where you can move forward, you can move backwards, you can move side to side, you can manipulate the ring in terms of, let's say, using the ropes, using it as a way of creating counter shots, using it as a way of luring your opponents into a certain particular danger. That's what you have going on with boxing in terms of the diversity of movements, but also the head movements, how and when to move your head, a certain way of, let's say, moving your body, moving your hips in conjunction with where your arm placement is and how you're going to parry your shots and how you're going to respond from your defense and into your offense. That is literally boxing and the sweet science in a nutshell. So when you have these two men, they are both diverse in everything when it comes to close range and when it comes to, let's say, further range, okay, long distance range. And I'm going to talk about that in this particular segment. With Canelo Alvarez, he's great at also manipulating his long range shots. He's got a great jab. You've seen it plenty of times in many of his past fights where he's implemented a jab. Sometimes it doesn't always work to his favor, and the Bivol fight was a great example of that. With this particular fight with David Benavidez, in all honesty, this is my God truth honesty and how I see it. I think that he's going to have a very hard time fighting a long range fight in this particular matter. So when we're talking about, let's say, the keys of victory, it is not for Canelo to do it in a sniper range. It is in it's It's very important for him to fight on the inside if he can get there. The problem is him trying to get there, you're going to have to face David Benavidez, who can hit you with uppercuts as he is coming in to, let's say, close the distance or even try to manipulate the distance, try to move in and out. So these are some things to take into consideration when you go into this fight. With David Benavidez, this is exactly the point that I am trying to make with this fella right here. Look at this. Right here, you try to move in a little bit close, okay, because that's the right thing to do. You're talking about a guy who is 6'2", okay, very long, especially for someone like Canelo. He's going to be extremely long for someone like Canelo. So this is the right thing to do. Get in close range. But this is the problem when you try to hit close range with David Benavidez. He can hit you with an uppercut. And not only that, if he has you cornered, he's going to smother you with shot after shot of hooks and punches. And I mean, you've seen the highlights during his fights during the pandemic. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The way that those shots are just heard like gunshots from across the room, because in all the pandemic fights, whether it was in the Apex with the UFC or whether it was in the boxing rings in the bubble that they had in Las Vegas, the shots, you could hear them. And I urge you to take a look at some of David Benavidez's fights, especially the way that he hammers you down within close range. So that's very important to know for this particular matter at hand. Also, with the diversification that I had complimented both Canelo and David Benavidez is going to have a great advantage in the long range. And this is why I have the picture right here with a sniper rifle, because David Benavidez, with his height, especially with the discrepancy that we're dealing with Canelo, standing at 5'8", 5'7" at best without shoes, okay, is going to be a serious problem for Canelo Alvarez. So that's something to really think about. Okay, it's going to be a serious problem for Canelo Alvarez to try to close that distance, because just like a sniper rifle, he's going to get hit from a further range that he's not going to see, which ultimately, by the way, is what it really takes to deal with somebody who's a sniper. That's what snipers do, right? They hit you from for far ranges, 5,000 feet, 1,000 feet. But in the boxing sense, he has a strategic advantage here, which, by the way, is, in my opinion, the keys to victory for David Benavidez. Now, what about the keys to victory for Canelo Alvarez? Right here, funny enough, it's a picture of a British police officer. And obviously, Canelo is doing exactly what that British police officer would do with that MP5, which is what? Close range fighting. This is what is important for Canelo Alvarez to try to close the distance against David Benavidez. He has to fight in close quarter combat, which, by the way, why is it that, let's say, police officers in London or in major cities like this, why do they use MP5s? Well, because the environment that you see in London, okay, it's not like any other city in America, okay? Well, most cities in England, I mean, they're rather small, right? The roads are small. The cars are small as a result of it. Not all, obviously, but they don't have a lot of pickup trucks the way that we do in America or something like that. But everything is small, especially within the city, not so much in a countryside where, yes, there's vast lands of horizon that you can go for miles and miles on out without seeing a neighbor. But when you are in an urban environment of London, everything is within close range. So why is it important for a police officer to carry an M5 within such closing proximities? Well, that's exactly why, because if they're going to chase somebody down, let's say a perpetrator of any kind, right? They're going to have to, let's say, go through walls. They're going to have to go through alleys and things of that nature. So, what is significant about that? Well, here's what it is. For one, they need a weapon that requires you to be able to shoot at a close range. And MP5 can offer that for you. So this is what Canelo has to do. But again, this is a reason why I'm very concerned about this fight for Canelo. For the same reason that I had mentioned that, well, who is the sniper in this particular fight in terms of shooting from long range? That's David Benavidez. So even if Canelo tries to move in close range, and by the way, as I mentioned with the example of this British police officer that uses it for these types of environments, these urban environments that are rather small, right? Uh Closed spaces. This is what you need to operate in that particular environment. So this is why Canelo needs to apply a close range method in order to close the distance with him and David Benavidez. But what is the problem with doing that for Canelo in particular? Well, let me tell you what the big problem is. A sniper will always hit somebody that has an MP5 from miles and distances away that they can't see, i.e., the jab, in terms of what David Benavidez can do in this particular fight, in this particular matter. So, where this fight is won and lost is between David Benavidez's long range and Canelo's short range. In other words, in order for Canelo to be able to, let's say, quote unquote, close the distance, he has to also fight within a much further range before he closes the distance. In other words, he has to master being able to fight far and being able to fight close. And that right there is no easy task in terms of trying to answer the call to that challenge against David Benavidez. So I think you know where I'm going with this. I think you know where I'm leaning towards. And if you want me to make a bold prediction straight away, I'm going with David Benavidez. But again, Canelo may very well surprise us. This is not the first time we've seen him take on somebody this height. Remember Callum Smith? But let's be honest, is Callum Smith David Benavidez? We don't know. They never fought. But rest assured, these two guys are the best at this particular division right now, and this fight needs to happen in order for us to find out. But ultimately, what Canelo has done for boxing, whether he won or lost against, let's say, David Benavidez in the future, I swear to you, the accomplishments that Canelo has, it won't matter. You want to know what's crazy? He got beat by Bivol not too long ago, maybe last year. Certainly not over the 2-year span, but guess what? He's still relevant. Why? Because he's undisputed champion. And he tried to move up at a weight class that he had no business in. But at the same time, for that same reason why he had no business up in that weight class, we're now going to find out how he really deals with an elite 168 guy that is primarily almost the same size as Bivol. So this is a reason why I see all these factors for David Benavidez. Nonetheless, either way, one thing remains for sure. There's this era right now that we are living in that is the absolute undisputed era of fighting. In other words, you have Canelo. He's undisputed, yet he's moving up weight classes, trying to challenge other people and continuously beating all the top guys in his weight class. while Charlo also tried to do the same thing, daring to be great, just like everyone else. Terrence Crawford did the same thing. He dared to be great, moved up multiple weight classes, and became undisputed champion in 2 of them. And then here came Josh Taylor as the quintessential predecessor of that particular weight class that Terrence Crawford dominated, and for him to just pick up the pieces of the undisputed championship belt. Devin Haney, the same thing. And then you look at all the UFC champions that are undisputed right now. Obviously, undisputed in the UFC means you just have to fight one guy, right? Without any of the politics involved in any of these sanctioning bodies. Whereas with boxing, you have to pick up these belts in order for you to call yourself an undisputed champion, because there's just 3 other champions in your weight class that you have to contend with. And because they have those belts, well, it makes it even more compelling. And then there's a story behind it in order to unify these belts. And then eventually all the belts get unified into an undisputed. But with the UFC, there's not a lot of those politics, which is why you look at this picture right here, right? On the very top where Terrence Crawford is, right between Devin Haney and Canelo Alvarez. Who do you have there? You have Sean O'Malley, Alesso Grasso. You have Pantoja. Who else do you have right there? You have John Jones. He's still the lineal champion, even though right now the landscape is changing, right? Who's the champion? Well, he is, but Tom Aspinall is also the interim champion. By the way, check out a video that I did on that. It's going hot right now. It's actually in the live portion. So it is called Undisputed. What does it really mean? Tom Aspinall and Terrence Crawford. Because now Terrence Crawford, the reason why I made that video primarily is because they stripped Terrence Crawford of the IBF belt. So what does that even mean now? Right? I urge you guys to check out that video. There's more information that I have right there on that. But you look at this. How about Pantoja? He just beat Brandon Moreno back in UFC 290 this summer. So now he's the undisputed champion. He's going in here defending his title at UFC 296, which, by the way, we're going to break down later on. And then you have Israel Adesanya, who's in this picture at the time this was taken, obviously way before, during the summertime. He was the undisputed champion, and here comes the dark horse of it all to Buster Douglas the entire thing, which is none other than Sean Strickland. And now he becomes the undisputed 185 champion. And then in the midst of that, you have Ian Gary, who gets kicked out of the gym of the current 170-pound champion, right? So he is now top 10. He's not too far away from Leon Edwards. Granted, if Leon Edwards continues winning and doesn't lose, okay? But then you have another beef that he has going on with the current middleweight champ, setting himself on a road to become the double champion. And that's the kind of culture that we have going on in mixed martial arts. These opportunities to be able to do that. And granted, boxing, if you notice, is sort of doing the same thing right now, following suit. And again, I've mentioned this in the video that I made regarding 2023, the greatest year of combat sports. I urge you guys to take a look at that video as well that I did regarding this matter. It's one of the greatest years of combat sports because look at all these undisputed champions that we have in boxing right now, to which we never had before for one reason or another, or it made it very difficult to produce these undisputed championship fights. And then on top of that, you have all these other glamorous fights that are going on in between, such as Francis Ngannou just now fighting Tyson Fury, which is very hard for us to even fathom, even after the fact with 1 month later. But now here we are transitioning into a fight between Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury. Now, finally, with the theme of this particular picture that I'm trying to paint for you guys right here and right now, is finally unifying the undisputed championship for the heavyweight strap ever since Lennox Lewis was the undisputed champion and the last undisputed champion of the heavyweight era. And now here we are. So great times ahead. And speaking of great times ahead, take a look at this. Obviously, we had a few weeks off now without MMA, without UFC in particular. Obviously, MMA is red hot across the globe. The PFL has bought Bellator. ONE FC stays hot. They've always had shows going up in Russia. You had some great European shows that are going on in the Cage Warriors, Bama, the Octagon, which is a new organization that is coming out of the Czech Republic, I believe, and they do shows in London, all throughout Europe. There's just so much MMA that is going on around the world. And then, of course, you always have Ryzen. How can you forget about Ryzen? Because after the UFC 296 pay per view, guess what? You're not going to have a UFC for a very long time. And lo and behold, within that winter break, you're going to have to watch the New Year's fight of Ryzen, which they have every year. They have a Ryzen card every year within the New Year's in Japan. And that's another MMA right there to take a look forward to. But during this week, obviously, we didn't have any UFC right after the Allen versus Craig fight, which was back in November of 2018, which I'm sorry, November 18th, 2023, which was just 10 days ago. That was the last time we had a UFC, and we haven't had a UFC since. The next time we're going to have a UFC is December 2nd. And prior to that, we had this fight with Benavidez and Andrade, which, by the way, going into it was a 50-50 fight. And now that Benavidez emphatically beat him, looking like with absolute ease for him, right? It shows the kind of level that he's at. And now we cannot deny him of giving him Canelo. And that's what we found out this week. So it was great that there was no UFC. And if you were a true combat sports fan like I was, this was the fight that you were able to check out for the week to get your fix of combat sports. Well, now that that's over, the next fight for the UFC is December 2nd, which is Beneil Dariush taking on Sarukian, which I believe that's going to be an Austin, Texas card. And then on December 9th, you have Shanghai, which is going to feature Song Yadong taking on Gutierrez. That's going to be in UFC China, Shanghai on December 9th, just 1 week before UFC 296, which, by the way, is a great card of a banger, because I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of storylines that are going into this fight. You want to talk about Paddy Pimblett and Tony Ferguson? I've mentioned some things about that. I have a video on that particular matter. I talk about David Goggins and his training with Tony Ferguson and how that could potentially lower his testosterone levels. There's a storyline in and of itself in that particular aspect, right? And then you have Paddy Pimblett, who came from a lackluster win against Jared Gordon. Many people believe that Jared Gordon had won that fight. And then you look at Jared Gordon, his last fight, looking really impressive. Now you got to think to yourself, well, just how great is Jared Gordon in relationship to how overhyped Paddy is, according to the eyes of many critics out there. And then Tony Ferguson is in this 5-fight losing streak, mind you, against some real elite guys. But yet here you have Paddy Pimblett, who seems like a perfect match, to where it's like you could tell a lot by who's going to win and who's going to lose in this fight. And what do I mean by you can tell a lot by who's going to win and lose in this fight? If Paddy wins, it shows that he is still a top rising prospect. And not only that, can potentially move up just a little bit further, maybe just within the top 15, maybe close to the top 10 range of opponents and calibers in that matter. And then if Tony Ferguson was to win, well, it just showed that all along, he really is truly elite, and the names and the top guys that have beaten him are just exactly that. Just top guys and elite guys that have beaten him, but he can beat the likes of Paddy Pimblett, which is especially an up-and-coming prospect that nobody really knows too much about in terms of getting tested out there in the elite level. Sure, he's been tested by the Jared Gordons of the world, the guys that you can create fight night cards out of. But what about the pay-per-view stars, the top 10, the top contenders, the guys that want to get title shots or guys that are close within that range? We don't know. But with this fight and how it's going to play out, we're going to find out a lot of things and we're going to know. We're going to know where Patty stands and we're going to know whether it was a fluke that Tony Ferguson lost those fights because they were elite guys, but in reality, he just needed to adjust his competition at his age, or maybe we've just seen a certain ceiling from him. But then we also have to ask, what is his ceiling? This fight is going to tell you that. Moving on from that, how about this? Ian Gary. Okay, so I got to tell you, there's a lot of insane situations that are going on with Ian Gary right now, right? Now, look, a lot of people are looking at Ian Gary as an absolute less of a man because of all these things that are going on, right? Okay, I get that. I understand that that's how it looks. But I also sort of understand the sensationalism aspect of it. And I sort of see the break between two types of MMA journalists and MMA content creators when it comes to Ian Gary, right? In particular, I'm going to show you a video. I'm going to react to it with James Lynch. This is actually the first time that I'm watching this. It's called I'm Baffled People Don't Get This. And I would assume this may have something to do with Ian Gary. And if it does, well, this is sort of my take on that particular aspect, right? I'm sort of indifferent about it. I'm not interested in the sensationalist aspect of what is going on with his life, in particular because we just really don't know. But for other people, they want to create narratives about it to somehow enhance, let's say, a certain view that people have when it comes to, let's say, relationships, or people that have, let's say, a broken mindset of certain relationships, or people that are into, let's say, the Andrew Tate philosophy of things, right? But either way, I've told you what I've mentioned about this particular matter. I urge you guys to take a look at also the video that I did regarding Conor McGregor and the riots that went on in Dublin, titled Conor McGregor and Tommy Robinson. I sort of draw comparisons with Tommy Robinson and his recent arrests on that as well. So I urge you guys to check that out. I also mentioned some things about Ian Gary in that and what my thoughts were on that, the objective truth on this particular matter that is a scandal, or what many hardcore MMA fans such as James Lynch would look at as, well, you know what, this isn't really anything that matters with fighting. But if you're one of these casual fans, guess what? You can't help but love this drama. You can't help but sensationalize yourself into this particular guilty pleasure of a certain content, right? Like when MMA Guru makes things about Ian Gary, oh, he did this, or his wife that, or this and that. You can't help but glue your eyes into it only because it is what you would call a guilty pleasure entertainment. Sort of like people that secretly watch the Kardashians but don't want to tell anyone about it, or people that watch professional wrestling but don't want to tell anyone about it. By the way, how about CM Punk coming back to the WWE and Survivor Series? That I didn't see yet, but who knows? What, maybe we'll check it out just for the sake of CM Punk coming back. But either way, yeah, I'm gonna play this video just so. This is, by the way, my first time reacting to it. I've never seen this video. I wanted to just kind of keep it fresh, which is why I never watched it. But I knew it had something to do with Ian Gary, so I'm gonna react to it while we're also gonna break down Ian Gary's fight in this particular matter. Here we go.
Hours, and even on my live stream today, I've seen a lot of Ian Gary defenders. Over the last 24 hours, and even on my live stream today, I've seen a lot of Ian Gary defenders on social media. And here's some of the stuff I pulled from Twitter. I don't want people going to search this up and looking up the username and all that. I just want to use these quotes as a discussion of topic today in this video. And that is people saying they don't understand why Ian Gary's getting hate. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. why Ian Gary is getting so much backlash, why people are being obsessive about him and talking about every little detail right now. That's the point of today's video. I touched on this a little bit in my last video, but I really think people don't maybe know the full story of why Ian Gary is getting criticized so much. But let's start with this first one here that says, is there a particular reason why Ian Gary gets so much hate? Something I've missed maybe, because some MMA fans will turn a blind eye when it comes to homophobia, racism, crimes of every kind, but cockiness is where they draw the line unless I'm missing something here. The Ian Gary hate is hilarious to me because at the end of the day, it's just another excuse for MMA Twitter to berate a woman, and they couldn't pass that up. Can someone give me a reasonable reason to hate Ian Gary? Where did the Ian Gary hate start? He's one of the hottest up-and-coming comers, has 6 striking knockout potential and is Irish. I get that some Daggies, I'm guessing Dagestanis, don't like him due to his ethnicity, but I rarely see an Ian Gary post that speaks positively about him.
All right, so I kind of wanted to interject on that particular matter first. First of all, I don't know if people hate Ian Gary. Right now, maybe I'm just looking at that from my own personal point of view because I don't hate him. Now, what I do not like is probably, I mean, look, who am I to like or not like whatever it is that he's into, right? But I just would not agree to the lifestyle that he has. I'll just put it like that, right? Like changing your last name for your significant other or something to that extent, having your ex-husband live with you guys or something to yeah, this right here, that's not for me. That's not something that I would apply in my life, but obviously this is something that he has going on. Now I don't know if I would hate him for something like that, and that's just me personally speaking. Now maybe others actually have this growing animosity towards him because he lives this way, but for me, I sort of have, well, for lack of a better term, a libertarian view on that in terms of how he's going to live his life and how I would be in the opposite end of that. But at the same time, who am I to judge? Either way, I don't hate him. Look, he's a fantastic fighter. You can't deny that about the kid. You know, he seems very promising. At first, when you heard about his story, you never really thought too much of it, right? You just thought, okay, you know what? This is a guy who was a young kid that met Conor McGregor when he was working at some suit store, and then out of nowhere, you know, he already becomes a UFC caliber fighter after winning the Cage Warriors championship, and then ends up meeting McGregor and having McGregor give him his graces towards his fight career, and he's undefeated. What is there to not like? I mean, the guy is a very likable character, right? Now, if we're talking about him, let's say, accusing Neil Magny of being, let's say, a child, violator or any kind of way, and I don't mean like a nunce or anything like that, or a chomo or nothing like that. I mean more like somebody that beats on your kid or something like that, right? We don't know if Neil Magny is anything like that, but for whatever reason, Ian Gary drew that up in his head to the point where, you know what? I'm just going to believe this so that I can be so hyped up and motivated to perform exactly the way that he did, which, by the way, he performed brilliantly. Now, he didn't get the finish because people are expecting a finish only on the reasons that they see Ian Gary as somebody with a high promising career, right? But at the same time, I mean, this is Neil Magny. It's not the easiest person to finish nonetheless. But yeah, I just don't think people hate Ian Gary. I think it's more of a criticism. And I think that it just falls into all the, let's say, the way that that person draws it up in his video said, oh, you know, just another way to go and attack and hate women or something like that. I don't know if it's that either. I just think that there is, however, a growing, let's say, quote unquote, red pill, movement that is going on online that sort of ignites this type of response. But honestly, that's the best explanation to really understand whether people actually genuinely hate Ian Gary or not. But that also doesn't dismiss the other situations that I had just mentioned with Neil Magny as well to consider.
which seems crazy to me. Doesn't seem crazy to me. And this video is not to dump on Ian Gary, but I'm trying to explain why people don't like him. And I don't know if people have been living under a rock, but this all started with Jeff Neal, him wearing a mugshot of Jeff Neal and selling it. Now, Jeff
recordings just got better. Hey, it's Dana from StreamYard. I'm so excited to announce that local recordings are
Neal for the most.
By the way, how about that, right? A little slick way of StreamYard to get in there and get their little plug-in. But hey, shout out to StreamYard. They are the facilitator of this particular broadcast. So thank you. But yeah, one more thing. I did remember this. I did remember Ian Gary having a shirt with this guy right here, Jeff Neal, right? His mugshot and whatnot. Look, that's part of the fight game. I'm sorry to tell you guys. I know that for some people that may seem like poor taste and whatnot, but you got to understand it's the fight game. You can't really be too offended about it. I mean, look, you can be offended. Yeah, you could be outraged, but you do something about it. Obviously, not in the way of, like, let's say, suing people, or in another case, maybe even using a weapon that has nothing to do with your hands, right? Again, it's like what Brendan Schaub said in his podcast, right? The rule is in Fight Club, okay, there's no suing in Fight Club, and there's no guns in Fight Club. So we just use these hands and that's it. But either way, let's continue on with this video.
Most part over his career, not a guy known to be really controversial or say anything crazy. The Jeff Neal mugshot is public. It's fair game what Ian did. Is it in good taste? No, it is not. That's something that's going to annoy people. So right off the bat, like, he was supposed to fight Jeff Neal prior to fighting Neil Magny. He, was scheduled to fight him. There was no trash talk. I don't think Jeff said a single bad word about him. And then Ian goes out there and wears a mugshot of Jeff Neal, which just, like, right off the bat, people are like, what are you doing? Like, this is very uncharacteristic of Ian. If you look at Ian's past opponents, Keenan, Song, Darian Weeks, all these other names, we didn't really hear Ian go after the opponents, but when he fought Neal, for whatever reason, he decides to wear this mugshot. So that's first where I think people are kind of like, dude, what are you doing? Like, this isn't even like, maybe some people thought it was funny, but I think a lot of people saw this and said, like, it's not, like, there's no reason to go after Jeff. Like, again, if this is Colby Covington and Colby Covington gets a DUI and Ian Gary's fighting Colby Covington and wearing his mugshot, that's understandable because Colby said some things that definitely would annoy people, and he's not liked by a lot of people in the MMA community. So that's more understandable. But who's Jeff Neal? Like, he's not a guy that's, like, controversial at all. So that's the first thing. Then he ends up fighting Neil Magny. And look, I know this is controversial to say, but this is my stance on it. Neil Magny makes a really, really bad analogy when it comes to talking about beating up Ian Gary. He says that I'm going to whoop him like I'm going to whoop my 3-year-old. And look, is Neil Magny ever been considered a child abuser prior to the fight with Ian Gary? No. Has he ever been in any sort of trouble with the law? No. Neil Magny made a bad comparison. Ian Gary took advantage of this, and you can read the quotes here. Saying that he basically shouldn't talk. And this went on even after the fight, but he basically tried to paint Neil Magny as a child abuser. Again, Neil Magny, not a guy known to be controversial, pretty straight edge guy, pretty nice guy. I mean, I've interviewed Neil for years. Same thing with Jeff. They're really, really nice people. Like, again, he's attacking people that don't have a history of being sort of mean or controversial towards fans.
Yeah, and that's the point of the matter. And I want to interject on that. So why is Ian Gary doing that? Look, sometimes you need a certain motivation to go out there and perform the way that you do. Some guys will just look at this sport as nonchalantly and say, yeah, you know what? I'm here to do a job. I'm here to perform. I'm here to work. I'm here to win fights. That's it. It's no different than going in there, winning a football match or winning a soccer game, whatever you want to call it, or whatever variations of football there are, or just winning a basketball game or winning a golf game. It's just very matter of fact. It's literally like you put 25 cents in bubble gum and you get bubble gum as a result of it. So that's really just all there is to it. Now, is it in poor taste? Yeah, obviously it's in poor taste. It's not for everybody, but that's what the fight game is literally all about. Why do people fight? Never mind the fight game. Never mind the aspect of just competing or anything like that? How about just why do people fight? Let's say, why do people fight in the streets? Well, they do it because they have bickering opinions and they have differing views, or they have some sort of differences that are unresolved. Okay. So again, why do people fight in the fight game, in the actual sport of the fight game? Because they all have differences and they all have different interests, and that includes competitive measures at that. So either way, everyone has the same goal, but everyone has a different path and a different method of trying to get there. This seems to be Ian Gary's go-to in terms of how he promotes himself as a product and also how he motivates himself as an athlete.
And so if you're going to attack people that are considered nice, you're not going to win people over. It kind of looks like bullying. And he definitely did that to Neil, for sure. The way he painted this whole child abuse thing. That's my take on it. I think it was in really poor taste. So after that fight, he talks about, he beats up Magny, gives him the bird after the fight, like all this different stuff. He's like trying to make Neil Magny be this like terrible person. And I think, again, this is why people are sort of upset with this. And then the latest thing, which is what I talked about in the last video as well. Look at this photo. Vicente Luque, very big moment for him. He gets baptized. All this, we're talking about religion here, which anyone knows in society, you mess with someone's religion, that's going pretty low, right? So Gary sees this post and then he makes this comment, December 16th, he'll be standing in front of you all tall and blonde because Luque says, I believed in him and seen how much he's blessed me in his life. Now, first off, these two used to train together. Now, I understand they're fighting now and, you got to put that aside. But like Luque, again, not a guy known to be like a jerk or like a controversial, like Sean Strickland type or anyone like that, right? Luque's a pretty nice guy for the most part. These guys are former training partners. They buried the hatchet. There was an audio message when this fight was booked. It seemed like everything was fair. And he makes this comment. And here's the thing, like, it's not even.
Well, James, you're right. That's the whole point of the whole matter. But he doesn't care. And it doesn't matter because, again, I agree with James Lynch here, but it doesn't mean that, well, Ian Gary is wrong or that he's right or that Ian Gary is right and that he's wrong. By the way, the fight game, what do? We settle our differences, right? So there is no wrong way or right way to go about it. Now, if you want to talk about the opinions of the fans when it comes to winning hearts and minds, okay, there's a great case for exactly everything that James Lynch is saying here. And I'm not disagreeing with him or having a go at him just because of that. It's just the matter of differences in views. And not only that, do the opinions of the outsiders that are not part of the conflict matter? I want you to think about that as well.
Clever. Like him saying he'll be standing in front of you all tall and blonde. Like, who's.
Hi, I'm Zoe Gong. As a traditional Chinese medicine chef and food therapist, I love using Squarespace to share my recipes.
Who saw that and said, oh man, I can't wait to see this fight after that comment? To me, it just looked like A, he was trying to make it about him, and B, he's trying to come down on Luque for something that is kind of a serious moment for him, right? Like he's talking about, getting baptized. So yeah, that's where he's losing people. And that's why he's getting criticized here. Now, look, I've said this before too. Is it fair that people are obsessing over Ian's relationship with his wife and talking about him taking the last name, which, by the way, I don't care about any of that. I really don't. What he does in his personal life is none of my business.
So I think it's really important to understand that it's very much opposite and non-related to how people are looking at this right now. Look, is it sort of a jerk move for him to do this with Vicente Luque, especially after he just got baptized and then Ian Gary says something to the effect, well, he's going to be standing in front of you tall, blonde, and powerful. So in other words, is he trying to say who I think he's trying to say who he is in that particular comment? And again, you're going to rub a lot of people the wrong way with that. I mean, how surprising, an Irish fighter pissing off somebody based on, let's say, religious animosity of some sort, right? If you remember Sinead O'Connor, the famous Irish singer who sung out Conor McGregor back in the Chad Mendes fight, who, by the way, later on became a Muslim convert and ended up slagging Conor off online because of Conor's anti-Islamic remarks when him and Khabib had their little rivalry going on, right? And even Conor went at Sinead O'Connor, saying to her, well, this is the fight business. Don't confuse the fight business for who I am. Basically trying to plead to her like, hey, look, you've met me before. You've sung me out in my fights. I'm a nice guy. But please, Sinead O'Connor, as what Conor is saying to her, don't believe all this hype that you see in the fight game. Because you guys remember, Sinead O'Connor went and slagged off Conor McGregor for the Conor Khabib beef they had going on. And why did she do that? Well, for one, she was already a Muslim convert at the time, right? And then obviously she saw all these comments that Conor had made towards Khabib, so she wanted to come to his defense. But then here comes Conor pleading with the Irish hero in Sinead O'Connor, saying, "Look, this is just a fight business. This is what we do." So that's one aspect of it. And then obviously, yeah, Conor McGregor I mentioned with Khabib, and then here comes Ian Gary slagging off of Vicente Luque based on his baptism. So that's not going to win a lot of fans over, and I would imagine Catholic Ireland is not going to look at that in a very good light either.
Yeah, that stuff's a little obsessive. The stuff about his family, people drawing conclusions, saying that the ex-husband lives with him, all this different stuff. I don't really care about any of that. That type of stuff, I will agree with people, that's going a little bit overboard. But this idea that Ian Gary cannot be criticized is just insane to me.
Okay, so that particular segment right there, I want to address that right now. James Lynch is absolutely right on that. Again, that's my own opinion. But I do see the two different narratives in this particular aspect of, let's say, the two types of different content creators, right? So let's draw a comparison between James Lynch and, let's say, MMA Guru. Now, you look at MMA Guru, is he loving all of this? Oh, my goodness. He is head over heels with this particular content because he even mentioned it himself. Before the November 18th Brendan Allen fight and the Paul Craig fight, after that, there wasn't a lot of MMA fights going on. There wasn't a lot of content. Obviously, there was a Cage Warriors card they had up in Newcastle. But other than that, there wasn't a lot going on. Okay. So he wanted to create content based on that because he knew that there wasn't going to be a lot of big news. And then here comes Ian Gary, his little spat off that he has going on with Strickland. Now it's intriguing. Now it's interesting. Now he has content to create. And it's literally sensationalism. You know what it reminds me of? It literally reminds me of the same status as, let's say, 90s British tabloid, which, by the way, MMA Guru is English, right? They do sort of have that tenacity in them to be nasty in terms of how they, let's say, publish their media, right? And again, this is just part of their culture. They just like to slag each other off, right? That's just what they do. So that's MMA Guru in a nutshell, okay? He wants all the sensationalism, whereas with James Lynch, the best way I could describe James Lynch is literally like CNN in the 1990s when people actually trusted CNN. Nowadays, there's the fake news narrative. There's the narrative of, oh, they are government agents or they are not to be trusted. You know, the trusted name in news, as you would recall every time you walked into an airport during the 1990s seeing CNN. That's just what it was. They were a trusted news source. Well, not anymore, right? But when they were, okay, that's who James Lynch is. He's not interested in the sensationalism. He's not interested in, let's say, the gossip or the rumors. He's interested in the facts, what is going on, and wants to report it as a result of it. Those are the two different contrasting MMA journalists that you're seeing today. And again, Ariel Helwani, where do you put him in that? Is he a sensationalist, yellow journalist, or is he somebody that is full of integrity that wants to speak the facts? My God, honest, true opinion on Ariel Helwani, I think he's a little bit of both. I think he likes to play both sides of those two types of journalists. He likes to play the guy that likes to call it down the middle and likes to call it what like it is with no filler or no fluff of any kind, right? But then let's say if you attack him in any kind of way and you make it personal, well then guess what? He's going to sensationalize everything about you. How about the time when uh Ariel Helwani was reporting on Dana White earlier of the year, right? When they had that little New Year's party for Dana White in Mexico when he had that little incident with his wife. So Ariel goes and talks about it. And what happens after? He goes and posts a picture on his show of some sort of domestic violence hotline, which, again, I get it. I understand if that's a cause that you really care for and something that you want to put out there as some sort of awareness, but a little bit of a bad timing. And all, of course, with the context of his conflict with Dana White, you can't help but not ignore that particular biasness in him in terms of quote unquote sensationalism. But further on,
when you're going after three different fighters that are pretty nice for the most part in the eyes of MMA fans, right? I mean, guys that don't have a history of getting arrested, don't have a history of saying anything crazy and controversial. It just looks like you're trying to bully them, and people see right through that, and that's why they're going.
Are you struggling with Google Ads for your dropshipping store? Our high-ticket dropshipping formula guarantees to be profitable on your
after Ian Gary here. That's my theory on this. So all these takes about saying that, oh, fans turn a blind eye to, certain things that are going on. Yeah, fans do in a lot of cases. But I've heard people say, even make comparisons to John Jones saying, well, no one said anything about John Jones abusing his wife. Yes, they did. There's plenty of articles, people online talking about John Jones and some of the things that have happened to him outside the cage. So this idea that you can't be criticized is just bananas to me. And also it comes from a place of where they can see what Ian's trying to do. He's trying to build himself up in a way that I think is off-putting to a lot of fans. Another thing we found out today too, it's not just fans that have been critical of Ian Gary. Brendan Allen today in an interview with Mark Raimondi. We're just going to watch this clip here quickly. It's not just fans that are going after Ian Gary. Even former training partners are saying things about Ian Gary and how he's kind of been rubbing people the wrong way. So listen to this. Apparently, there's some interesting footage that's out there.
And then you get things like someone posted a video of Shavkat and Jason wrestling. I was there on that day. I watched it. I was 2 feet from it. One, I feel how I feel about the video. But two, I think he commented somewhere on there. I heard someone say he commented somewhere on there. He records everything, right? They record everything. But just know there's video, and he knows what name not to say to let it come out of what happened to him. I'm not gonna release it, but just know there is someone in that gym that has slept him out. So for him to come in and say, oh, everyone knows how good he is striking and how good he is here and this and that and this and that. Yeah, everyone has their days. Hell, he's probably got the better of me a couple sparring sessions, but there's many sparring sessions I did what I did too. So I don't know. I think it's just a lot of talk, and it's hard to take Jim.
So anyways, the reason I want to bring that clip up is Brendan's talking about how Ian has kind of rubbed people the wrong way. Now, granted, Luque trains there, so obviously they're going to be backing Luque in this fight against Ian Gary. But the point is that you're hearing this stuff come out. We heard Leon Edwards say that Ian Gary can't train there, and there was talk of, again, Patty revealing that he'd been knocked out. I'm not a fan of people, by the way, saying that a fighter has been knocked out here. But the point I'm trying to make is that he's even rubbing fighters the wrong way. For Brendan Allen, who has no real connection to Ian Gary other than Gary used to train there, they're not in the same division. For him to come out and say there's a video that exists of him getting knocked out, I think speaks volumes to how Brendan probably feels about Ian Gary. So again, this goes back to my original point of people being like, I can't believe Ian Gary's being criticized. This is why. There's a reputation that's being built. And, some of the stuff may be true. It may not be. Some of the stuff that people are saying about him, that's not what we're talking about in today's video. What we're talking about today is, why do people dislike Ian Gary? I've shown you more than enough proof here to understand why people, rub him the wrong way. And I'll say it one more time in this video. I am not a fan of people going after people's families and talking about relationships and stuff like that. I think that stuff's a little obsessive, but you want to criticize Ian Gary for other things, him being too cocky or whatever. That's fair game because of what we're seeing here, what I just showed you in this video. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below.
So the way that I sort of see that, right? I got to be honest with you, right? He made quite a good point there in the end with James Lynch. Now, I'm going to tell you why he made a great point at the end. His reason being is because there's a lot of false equivalence that goes into, let's say, trying to criticize someone. And then also, when people say, well, you criticize him for this, but you don't criticize him for that. First of all, who are you talking to? Right? Are you talking to the same person? Because I'm sure it's not the same two people that criticize one thing and then have a different bias towards the other. The variations of that, it's very hard to pinpoint out. And you don't even have an exact person as to who, and the data pool of people and sample size of population to say that, okay, X equals Y because they're saying all these things, but they're not saying that. There's no specifics. There's no particular starting point to whatever it is you're trying to connect the dots in. So again, it's just one of those arguments that just gets lost in translation overall, which again only lends itself to sensationalism. It lends itself to opening itself for gossip and rumors, and having the loudest voice, let's say, be the dominant narrative rather than trying to find out the truth of what is going on. But either way, that's the best way to really describe what is going on with Ian Gary in a nutshell, right? And more on that for fight card. You have Shakhmat Rahmanov taking on Thompson. You got Pantoja taking on Royval for the flyweight championship. And then you have Edwards versus Colby Covington. By the way, a fight that I'm going to break down in full detail as the time goes on, right? Let's take a look at the prelims that before we do that, let's take a look at all the fights that are going on for December 2nd that is coming up not too far away this particular weekend. It's fight week again, as they say, right? So you have Beneil Dariush taking on Arman Tsarukyan. That's going to be a great matchup for the 155 division. Obviously, I had mentioned that Beneil Dariush was on a huge win streak for a long time, right? Until obviously he ran across Charles Oliveira, and that's how Charles Oliveira was able to obtain his title shot and rematch that he never got because of the injury that had to force Volkanovski to step in 11 days notice only to get knocked out. And then here comes Arman Tsarukyan, who, by the way, gave Islam one of the hardest fights of his career, other than the only loss that Islam suffered in the hands of Martins. But nonetheless, Arman Tsarukyan's UFC debut was against Islam Makhachev. Yeah, here's your UFC debut. Good luck. You're facing the future 155 champion, the heir to the throne of Khabib. And here he is, now trying to make his way up, taking on a guy that was a potential title contender up until they gave him Charles Oliveira. They're like, wait a minute. Let's stop you in your tracks right there. You got to get through Charles Oliveira. He was a former champion. We're thinking about giving him a rematch, but if you get the best of him, then yeah, we'll put you in there. But Beneil Dariush had that John Fitch mentality. He's like, I'm just going to continue to win and win until you can't deny me anymore. So you have Jalen Turner stepping in, taking on Bobby Green. Obviously, Dan Hooker had that injury he had going on. And here comes Jalen Turner as a result of it, taking on Bobby Green. It's a great fight, right? I mean, the range that you're going to see between Jalen Turner and Bobby Green, it's staggering. I mean, Jalen Turner is just way huge for this weight class, right? But again, he made a great account of himself against Dan Hardy, but Dan Hardy came out on top of that one, and here he is coming to redeem himself against the veteran Bobby Green. I see this fight for Bobby Green, believe it or not, right? A very experienced guy. You've seen the power that he was able to possess in his last fight, in his last win. Jalen Turner, I mean, he can crack. You've seen that head kick that he placed on Dan Hooker, but then obviously Dan Hooker was as tough as he was able to sustain that and was able to fight on and win the fight by decision. I'm going to have to go with Jalen Turner on a decision on this one. Okay, with Armin Sarukian and Beneil Dariush, this is Armin Sarukian's fight to win. I can actually see Armin Sarukian get a first round knockout, if not a later round submission. So Rob Font versus Davison Figueroa. I got Davison on this one. I know Rob Font, he's an ever improving fighter. Trains with, who does Rob Font train with? I believe he trains up in Massachusetts. Right? Yeah, he does. He trains with that Massachusetts team. Let's see, what was his last fight? He lost a decision against Corey Sandhagen prior to that. And then he got a knockout against Adrian Yanez. So the guy can crack. I'm going to have to go with Davison on this one, right? He's just more of the experienced fighter. Not only that, a championship experienced fighter. Came very close against Brandon Moreno a few times, okay? And, I mean, he's one of the top guys in the world, right? Like, here's the thing, right? Whenever you see a fighter lose certain decisions and this and that, you got to think to yourself, you know, it doesn't really tell much of the tail of the tape, right? Which is why I think that the next time somebody sees Francis Ngannou get in a boxing ring and knock someone out, I don't think they should be entirely surprised. So we'll see. I'm going to go with Davison on that one. Sean Brady against Kelvin Gastelum. And this right here is probably going to be fight of the night, right? Because Sean Brady, look, we know the type of ceiling that he has. Obviously, it was Bilal Muhammad, but then Bilal Muhammad just looked really good in that, right? And you got to think, will Kelvin Gastelum use pace to try to weaponize it against Sean Brady? And I don't think so. I think this is going to be one of those fights where I think there's going to be a lot of thinking involved. There's going to be a lot of chess match striking that's going to happen. I think they're going to both be very reluctant in how they're going to engage with each other. But I can also see Sean Brady getting the A-side decision in this one, right? He's the up-and-coming guy. Obviously, you know what? They're not even that far apart in age, but the experience between them, I mean, it's not really that far off. Obviously, Kelvin Gastelum has had more experience on the top level of things. Sean Brady is just trying to get himself up there, right? And obviously his ceiling was against Bilal Muhammad, and he's just trying to get right back on top. So here comes Clay Guida against Joaquim Silva. Now, we got to find out a few things about this guy, right? Because Clay Guida has been fighting since 2003. So we're talking about 20 years in the game, since he was 21 years old, taking on the 34-year-old Joaquim Silva. Look, I think it's important to understand that, okay, so he fought Armin Sarukian, was his last fight at lightweight. Okay, very interesting. Okay. Now, that's quite deceptive, just so you know, right? Losing to Armin Sarukian. Okay, prior to that, he had a TKO win against Jesse Ronson, had lost a few times against Ricky Glenn, Nasrat. Okay, he's got a win over Jared Gordon. Okay, but that's all the way back in 2018. So there's something promising there. Look, I think at a certain point, damage comes into play. I really think that it does. This is something you can't deny. It comes into play, and this could very well show in this fight. Like one shot, let's say in Clay Guida's chin, right? He just could go out just like that, right? You know, he could go out just like that, and out of nowhere, you're like, oh, wow, you know, he has no more chin, because look at all the wars that he's been through, right? You remember the Diego Sanchez fight that he had? I mean, look, I could see Joaquim Silva getting a win in this one. Poirier Serrano taking on Dustin Soltoff. I got Poirier on this one. So I got Soriano in this one. Just based on, well, let's take a look at the opponents that they've faced, right? So Pinelli Soriano, the Hawaiian, has last fight has loss over Roman Kopylov. Okay, not bad, not a bad loss to take among other type of competitors that are out there at the 185 division. Prior to that, he had a win over Dalsha Lumabula back in July of 22. This was in that ABC card back in July of 2022. I remember watching this fight as I was driving down to Washington, D.C. So he has a loss over Nick Maximoff, by the way, who's, he's a guy that's trained with Nick and Nate Diaz out here in the Stockton area. And then Brendan Allen is lost to Brendan Allen. Okay, so these are not bad names to lose to, unless, of course, Nick Maximoff. That's a bit strange. Oh, okay, but that was a split decision, so that could have gone either way. I don't even know if Nick Maximoff is still in the UFC. But nonetheless, let's take a look at his opponent, Dustin Soltoff. What are we dealing with this guy right here? So 32 years old, fights out of Germany. Okay. And let's see, what are some of his style? He is a black belt in Lucha Libre, which is basically wrestling. So he's got good wrestling. Red belt in Tang Soo Do. So he's got traditional martial arts of some sort. He's got okay level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, purple belt. 19 fights, 14 wins, 5 losses. He's had a loss to Abus Magomedov. Okay, so this is quite a good fight with these two, right? The type of crossroads that him and Poirier are going to have. I think I could see Poirier finishing this guy, right? I mean, he was finished by Abus Magomedov in his last fight. This may very well affect how he's going to come into this fight. Obviously, with Soriano, his last fight, he was TKO'd by Roman Kopylov. I'm sure that there's some few things that he may have learned from that fight. But I think going the distance with Brendan Allen and Nick Maximoff, right? I think kind of lends him some sort of experience to be able to pull off a win in this one. I could see him finishing. Yeah, I'm going to go with Soriano finishing Dustin here, probably in the second or third round TKO of some sort. So I'm going to go with that one. Okay, so what else is in this particular fight card? Okay, so we have Sean Brady. We went over that. Okay, so that's basically the main card. Okay, Misha Tate taking on Julia Avila. So we know a lot about Misha Tate. Obviously, former champion, has took on the likes of Ronda Rousey, has took on the likes of Holly Holmes, has beaten Holly Holmes, has been beaten by Amanda Nunes. Now, who is Julia Avila in comparison to Misha Tate? So 35 in comparison to Misha Tate, 37, but obviously Misha Tate has a way vast experience. I mean, the amount of wins that Julia has, Misha Tate has had those same amount of losses to which she can learn from, and then the big 19 win fights that she's had in her whole entire career. Now, what do we know about Julia Avila? So she fights out of LA, okay, or fights out of Oklahoma, but is from LA originally. Okay, has a rear naked choke over Storilanko. Okay, Gina Mazzani. Here's the thing. I think that I see Misha Tate getting a decision in this one just based on the experience alone, and I think that her wrestling is going to carry her over into this fight. If she doesn't finish her by ground and pound stoppage or some sort of submission in the later rounds, I could see her edging a decision in this one, a hard-fought decision at that. Then you have Jakar Close taking on Joe Kaleshi, Zachary Reese taking on Cody Gunbridge, undefeated Zachary Reach. So this is interesting. It's always interesting to see these undefeated guys, right? And what it is that they bring to the table. 29 years old, 6'3", 6-0, has a win in Dana White's Contender Series. Eli Aronov has a win over him, and then has wins in the Fury Fighting Championship. So this is basically his UFC debut, and quite promising, right? Taking on someone like Cody Grunbridge. So what do we know about Cody? Let's take a look at what we know about Cody as he takes on Zachary the Savage Reach. So this is going to be an interesting debut for Zachary here. So we have Cody Gunbridge, right? 29 years old, fights out of Colorado. Factory X team that he trains out of. He's a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. Okay, and has been a pro since 2019, so not very long. Okay, he has a loss over Cedric Dumas, who just had a win recently. Jacob Malkin back in. Okay, that was he got a win just based on a legal elbow. All right. But then prior to that, he was just getting finished. Okay, so this is basically a setup fight for Zach. I mean, there's no two ways about it. He's going to get an early first round finish in this one for sure. For sure, right? He is, but again, it's the UFC. You never know. Obviously, it's where the toughest guys in the world fight and the best organization that has all the best fighters. So you never know. How about this? Jakar Close has been a staple in a lightweight division for a long time. 35 years old, only 2 losses, right? Now you look at Jakar Close. If you guys don't know, he was a guy that sort of got shoved by Jeremy Stevens, and ever since then they banned people from I guess, shoving each other during the weigh-ins because it caused an injury. Well, it apparently caused him an injury, so it was enough for them to do that. Look at the losses that he's had against Beneil Dariush, against David Tamer, and that's really about it. Other than that, I mean, he's quite been a staple in the 155 division. He has a win over Bobby Green, Christios Diagos, Rafa Garcia, and yeah, I mean, but not quite active. Obviously, that was 2022, 2 fights in 2022, 1 fight in 2020, which he lost to Beneil Dariush, really set him back. And then 1 in 2019 and 2 in 2018. So not the most active. Is so an impressive record, but nonetheless, it's just, yeah, it is what it is, right? So but here he is now. I think this is his fight to win. Let's take a look at Joe Soleski and try to understand his opponent here. So, fighting out of Wilmington, North Carolina, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, black belt. Okay, so he has great grappling, right? I'm sure Jakar Close can deal with someone like this in the grappling exchanges. He's had a loss against Jared Gordon, split decision. He's had a loss as KO in the regional scenes, and in 1 decision loss. So I just think, I think with the big names that Jakar Close has taken on in the sport, I can see him just edging out a decision in this one because this is a tough guy in Joe Soleski right here, right? He's got a submission win in against Carl Deaton, and he was supposed to fight Benoit Saint Denis. That would have been an interesting fight to really see the type of skill level or the type of ceiling that Benoit Saint Denis, obviously, that never came to fruition. But I just think that the type of names and experience that Jakar Close has as in comparison to Joe, I think will just lead Jakar Close to edge out a decision on this one. So that's going to be my final prediction for that particular fight. I'm going to go with Jakar Close by a decision. So what else is in this particular card? Steve Garcia taking on Melzico Costa. 6 feet, 145, very tall 145er. right? I could see him have a real jab advantage in this one just based on using his height. So Steve Garcia fighting out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, probably a training partner of John Jones. Yeah, he is Greg Jackson's gym. He's had a win over Chase Hooper, knocked him out, which was a great win for him, and then followed it up with a win against Shaylan, and has a TKO loss against Machati. There's someone no one really known. Luis Pena, how about him, right? Remember that guy? He has a decision loss over him. So, okay, he's quite an experienced guy himself. So he is taking on Mizel Costa. What do we know about this guy? So, by the way, it's quite good how the UFC is really meticulous in how they put these fights together, right? Which, again, this is why in this particular league, in this particular organization, the best fight the best. So let's take a look at the record of Costa here, courtesy of Tapology. He's got a 1-win streak going on right now. Fights at a Shoot Box Academy. Okay, he's been an LFA veteran. Has a loss over Thiago Moises. Has a decision win over Austin Lingo. Has a decision loss against Gomez. Okay. So this is a guy that's hard to finish, but he can also be submitted. And he's had one record here where he's been stopped for retirement, right? Like, in other words, a guy has some sort of quit in him, right? And again, the way that I've seen Steve Garcia in some of his fights, I think there's just this is a guy that's very hard to put away, right? And then he trains with John Jones up in Albuquerque, which gives you some sort of advantage in high elevation. So this guy has a great cardio. You've seen that in the Chase Hooper fight, where Chase Hooper tried to push the issue on him, and again, got the better of Chase Hooper just based on the tenacity that he possesses. Yeah, this is going to be a fight for him to win. I could see Steve Garcia get a first or second round knockout in this particular fight. So that's going to be my prediction for Steve Garcia and Costa in that end. So let's see what else is in this card. By the way, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for staying and watching this particular content from here until on. If you guys want to rewind back, I have some gems regarding the David Benavidez and Canelo breakdown. I also did that earlier on tonight, so you guys can watch and rewind from the very beginning and check that out. So let's see here. Sean Woodson. Oh, wait, no, that's a fight that's canceled. So back to Sarayukin taking on Dariush. So I've covered that. Rodolfo Bellato, Ihor Portera, Wellington Thurman versus Jared Gooden, and then Veronica Macedo taking on Jamie Lynn Hort. So this one right here, this is Dan Hardy's wife, right? Veronica. I'm going to go with her on this fight, even though I know this girl is undefeated. Actually, no. You know what? Geez, I don't know, man. You'd have to really do some research on this particular fight to really know what we got here, right? So there's not a lot of tape or any type of information you can find about Jamie other than her decision when she had against Haley Cowan in her last fight, which was back in April. Why I'm confident for Veronica Macedo to win this fight is because, look, I just think Dan Hardy is a brilliant coach. The fact that that's her husband, somebody that lives with her, who they talk about MMA all day, they practice MMA all day, and Dan Hardy is an absolute brain for the sport. I can't see how that isn't a benefit for her. Now, obviously, she's had some tough road in her career. She's had a few losses and whatnot. But again, if there's anybody to know how to break down the mistakes and the losses that she's made before. I mean, Dan Hardy is that guy, man. He is that guy. So I think as long as Dan Hardy is in her corner, I think she's going to go very far. And even Dan Hardy told her herself, "Hey, listen, I think you're going to be champion and this and that." And then she's like, I don't know, I don't know if I'm as good as any of these girls or this and that." And of course, Dan Hardy is just trying to maybe be a supportive husband, but at the same time, I think that he really does believe that. I think that he truly believes in his coaching and his brain for the sport, that I think that he can confidently say that he can take this woman to the top. And yeah, I see her winning this fight by a decision. So Wilmington Thurman, the Brazilian. So what is fascinating about this guy? I mean, let's take a look at some of his history right here. So he's had a decision loss against Andre Petrosky and Randy Brown. Has a submission win over Misha Krushnok. Okay, has a win over Sam Alvey. Doesn't really say much. Has a loss. Has been knocked out by Andrew Sanchez. So he takes on Jared Gooden. Okay, 22-9. Jared Gooden fights born from Birmingham, Alabama. Okay, and he fights out of Atlanta, Georgia. He's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Trains down there at the SBG in the Georgia area. By the way, SBG is a worldwide franchise. Even before the Conor McGregor invasion in the UFC, I mean, Forrest Griffin trained in SBG in the Georgia area, not necessarily the one in Dublin, but yeah, they're sort of like sister companies at that. So this guy, he's had a decision loss against Carlston Harris in his last fight. Has a loss against the current PFL 205 champion, Impa, back in July last year. This was an ex-MMA back in, so I guess that was his road to come back after that devastating knockout loss he had against Joaquin Buckley. So how I see this fight, this one's a close 50-50 fight with Wellington and Thurman. I'm going to go with Jared Gordon by split decision on this one. I think that he's going to use his height and reach to out jab him, and I think that's what's going to win this fight if he does take that route in terms of using his jab to win this fight against the shorter man with the shorter reach. So let's see what else is in this card. We've almost covered the entire card now for UFC. I believe this is going to be in Austin, Texas. So the last fight we have yet to cover, how about this one? El-Kheer Potera taking on Rodolfo Bellato. So two Brazilian lads from what I understand here. Let's take a look at Rodolfo's profile here. Fight history. He's had a 2-win streak, 3-win streak actually. 2 in the LFA and then 1 for Dana White's Contender Series. So again, this literally is his UFC debut. How about this? He has a TKA loss against Vitor Petrino, who, by the way, is just red hot right now in the middleweight division. So he is obviously taking on Rodolfo Bellato. What do we know about El-Kheer Potera here? So he's 6'3". Okay, let's see if we have any profile on this guy. Tapology, or let's go with Sherdog. By the way, one of the oldest MMA websites of all time. Joe Silva, the former matchmaker for the UFC, had an account in this particular site. And what these guys used to do was just go in here and talk MMA all day and just chat and debate. And basically it became the epicenter of MMA culture at one point. But yeah, that's neither here or there. So he's taken on the Ukrainian. He has a loss over Carlos Ulberg, who, by the way, is the training partner of Israel Adesanya. So he's also been knocked out by Nikolai Negumaranu. Okay, so he's susceptible to getting knocked out, right? Especially by somebody who is sort of, I guess, a technical striker at that, right? So how do we compare that to, let's say, some of the wins that Rodolfo has had, right? In retrospect to how I obviously he's been knocked out by Vitor Petrino twice. So in reality, this is his only two losses. His only two losses was a knockout against a really top elite guy. One guy that I guess is probably projected to being a top 10 UFC middleweight probably by next year. I'm talking about Vitor. Other than that, you look at his wins, he's got submission wins here. He's got knockouts in the first round, TKO punches in the first round, a lot of TKO. Really, it's just most of his finishes in terms of strikes are TKOs, right? Not doesn't really have this insane knockout power, right? So, in conclusion to that, I see this fight as a win for Rodolfo, perhaps maybe by TKO once again, right? It's not he's not going to knock him out devastatingly or anything like that, but I think he's going to hurt him enough to where he can finish him somewhere down the road. So I'm going to go with Rodolfo by TKO, ground and pound finish. Follow it. It's basically followed from a strike that he's going to land on him, maybe a cross right hook or a head kick of some sort. And yeah, he's going to put him down and get the TKO finish. So that's all for the fights of this coming Saturday. The week after that, obviously, there's going to be UFC China. We're going to talk more about that. And then we're also going to talk more about the fights that are going to happen in UFC 297, the whole full card breakdown of UFC 296, which will take place in December 16th. So it's going to be a great December that we're going to have going on for the UFC, right? Obviously, it's basically just 3 fights left of the year, right? Dariush, Shanghai, and UFC 296. That's basically it for the entire year. And then, of course, there's probably going to be Ryzen somewhere down the road, but that's neither here or there. So don't forget to like and subscribe. I will also do a video regarding UFC 296 of how it's going to be one of the greatest press conferences of all time. I urge you guys to check that out sometime tomorrow. I'm going to drop that. I'm actually just going to be in the process of making it and then just dropping it tomorrow as usual. So don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you guys like the breakdown that I did for the Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez part 2. Check out my part 1 where I did a psychological breakdown of how these men basically grew up and how it's going to affect their way of thinking and their way of movements and their way of preparations into this fight, and also their motivations at that. And then I went on to talk about the cards that are coming up for the UFC, the fights that are coming up this Saturday. I also talked briefly about the storylines that are going on with UFC 296. So did I miss anything else in regards to this particular content? Let's see. I'm sure I've covered it all, but I just want to make sure just so we can, so we have covered the 2 fight nights, 296, the storylines that are involved, and the segments for, yeah. So, okay, so I have the link here for part 1. Yeah, so be sure to check out part 1. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching the entire stream. if you were here that whole time. And don't forget to like and subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, and I will see you guys soon. Inshallah. So, one of the reasons why I wanted to do MMA content and cover mixed martial arts in total is because when you cover mixed martial arts, it's oh, sorry about the little overlap there. So, the reason why I really wanted to do MMA content and cover mixed martial arts, UFC, and boxing as a whole is because of the fact that when you are covering mixed martial arts, you're not only covering one particular sport, and not only that, you're not only covering one circumference of a sport, but rather an entire lifestyle, an entire religion, an entire way of doing things in different countries in terms of routines, in terms of training methods. And not only that, understanding the cultural barriers and cultural similarities that come with mixed martial arts. So I'm not attempting to make this particular content about a particular life story of mine by any stretch of the imagination, but rather to try to explain to people as to why I would be a formidable competition to, let's say, journalists and other MMA content out there. For one, obviously, we are in the sphere of YouTube content creation. And so, because of that, we're trying to garner attention and we're trying to cover mixed martial arts. Obviously, it's a very redundant process in the way that everybody does it. They do the prediction shows, they do the preview shows, they give you a breakdowns of the kicks and the punches. Some may know what they're talking about, some may not. Again, I let you judge for yourself whether I know what I'm talking about or not, just based on these particular pictures that you're looking at. So, again, this is not trying to make it into about my life story, but rather why I would be a very useful tool in the world of MMA in terms of trying to explain a storyline, in terms of trying to explain how the public can relate to certain uh, people's stories or certain struggles or let's say similarities that you can draw from in different cultural mashings, such as, for example, you can take a look at similarities in, let's say, Conor McGregor and Tupac Shakur. Now, what MMA content would go out there and boldly say something like that? Well, these are some of the things that I can offer because I'm trying to give you insights on from understanding, let's say, growing up in the 90s, what kind of rebellious mentality an artist like Tupac had, and in relationship to how that can be influencing to, let's say, a young Conor McGregor growing up in Dublin. So those are some of the things that I can offer in terms of MMA content that is ever redundant in the world of copycat leagues, because oftentimes Joe Rogan and many other commentators out there always cite how the UFC is a copy league when it comes to the fighters and the techniques that they imply. Well, if it works, if a calf kick is what works and a lot of people are winning big results with it, why change it and stop doing it if it works, right? So ultimately, everybody is going to do that. Well, in MMA content creation and MMA YouTubing, you often notice that everybody is doing the same thing. They try to catch a certain algorithm by, let's say, not putting too much videos in a particular day. Maybe they'll post two instead of four, which kind of maybe hinders a bit of their potential or the type of stories that they can put out there at a certain moment of time. Perhaps maybe it gives you a sense of feeling accomplished in thinking that you are a better MMA YouTuber than you actually aren't. Because let's face it, some guys, and I'm not saying that they're not great, but they just have the right strategy. And mm, I don't know if I'm a strategic kind of person in the way that I would, let's say, release my content or anything like that. I don't know if I would be the type that would even be careful as to what particular subjects I'm willing to touch, as you've seen with the Sean Strickland content that I did with calling him a Nazi champ. Now, obviously, those are some of the things that you have to do in the world of YouTube and in the world of content creation is give a little bit of a shock value. Now, when you listen to me and you listen to how I convey my message and how I cover these fights, is it in any way non objective? Okay, maybe perhaps just like any other fight fan out there, you're going to have certain favorites. And full disclosure, there are certain guys that I have trained with that are active and inactive, both in those sectors of the fight world that I've been involved with. So maybe I'm going to have a certain bias into one side or the other, as opposed to, let's say, all these other mom in the basement MMA content creators where they have no relationships with any fighters out there because of the fact that they just don't go out there and train. They don't go out there and sometimes to the betterment of their content. That's probably great because then they can give you a very objective point of view that, let's say, these other former fighters or people that are involved in the business would never be able to give you. But nonetheless, it is, how do you say this? All subjective in how you want to consume your MMA content and the type of people you want to listen to. But some of the things that I like to offer, once again, is conveying a story in a historical sense. Okay, like for example, if let's say you want to convey a story about how one particular fighter has more of a strategic advantage than the other, you could draw examples of, let's say, World War II and how the Japanese were neutralized through Hiroshima bomb, and how the Germans had overestimated their uh, methods and their planning as far as their transgressions and lack of understanding the enemy and their failures along the way that led them to the result that you've seen World War II to be, right? These are all the things that you can draw from. And those are the things that I'd like to bring to light because, once again, oftentimes MMA content creation is just repetitive. Everybody wants to do the same thing. Everybody wants to have just a betting show of some sort. Everything is about gambling. So everything is about predictions. And don't get me wrong, I do predictions as well because I do want to display a little bit of my understanding of the sport. And oftentimes, or were a lot of times, where I've gotten a lot of predictions correct. You can look at some of the past videos that have been done here to try to understand where I am with understanding how matches are going to be and how they're going to go. But it's a lot more than just the kicks and punches, right? Like, take for example, you have somebody like Khamzat Chimaev who is now fighting in Abu Dhabi, coming up against Paulo Costa. Now, what can you draw from that? Let's say from a political and geopolitics, world affairs kind of segment. What can you draw from that? Well, for one, take a look at Costa. He's friends with this former Brazilian Prime Minister Bolsonaro, who is basically the South American Trump in the way that he is considered to be anti-indigenous people, at least in the accounts of many Brazilian fighters and many Brazilian people that lean left that would say that. Uh, but nonetheless, Paulo Costa endorses this guy. He hangs out with him, and you have Khamzat Chimaev, who hangs out with Ramzan Kadyrov, who is a very controversial figure at this particular time because of his sworn allegiance to Vladimir Putin. And because of that sworn allegiance, well, guess what? That all ties into the Ukrainian conflict. And then Usyk, of course, is tied into that because even in his fights with Dubois, guess who was on the screen talking right before Usyk was going to go out? It was none other than Zelensky. So all this other stuff that they talk about in the world outside of MMA and the mainstream sports world, they hate it when you try to get political. They try to silence LeBron James from talking about China. The next thing you know, he redacts his statement and goes and makes an apology and all of this and that. Whereas with the MMA world, it's just like these guys are tied to some of the most vile, some of the most craziest, and not only that, some of the most controversial figures, whether you love them or hate them, in the political world. And that in and of itself, I think, is really some of the most interesting aspects of combat sports that a lot of these other MMA content creators are just missing. And I'm not saying they're missing it out totally, but I think that they're not doing enough of, let's say, awareness to these particular topics or issues. Like they just want to get on with the kicks and punches. And of course, again, maintaining the integrity of mixed martial arts channels, I am going to give you that. But while I'm going to give you the kicks and punches, I'm also going to give you the stories of Paulo Costa being affiliated with the likes of Bolsonaro, the controversial South American Brazilian politician, the likes of Khamzat with his relationship with Ramzan Kadyrov and his sons, and how that ties into the world of mixed martial arts and how they're going to be treated in, for how you see Khamzat right now having troubles getting visa issues. Nobody knows what's up with that. What is going on? Is it just something that the UFC is keeping under wraps because maybe perhaps this is one of those situations that if the UFC has to reveal to the world that, oh, Khamzat has visa issues, he can't fight in the United States because of this conflict in Ukraine, it's just going to bring negative attention to the UFC. Hey, shout outs to Zane Heavy Boxing Dosage. My man, thanks for tuning in. By the way, guys, don't forget to check out his interview that he did with none other than the boxing pundit Spencer Fearon in London, England, with some of the best boxing content that you will find in the UK and around the world. But yeah, man, nonetheless, it all ties in. And by the way, how I know this is because guess what? I have an understanding for the public relations field, right? It is somewhat of a career that I'm into at the current moment of time. So it is something that I understand from a sports management perspective and how they're going to handle these things and how they're going to keep these things under wraps. Now, do I know for a fact that Khamzat Chimaev has visa issues? Well, no, I don't have the proper evidence in hand to give that to you, but a lot of telltale signs point in that direction. And why do I say that? Well, for one, you take a look at Khamzat Chimaev, right? The guy loves to fight. He loves to fight every week, and he will absolutely go and take any fights that he can, and he has proven that. And then he became famous. Next thing you know, it's harder to get him fights because now he's dangerous. Now the other top ranking guys don't want to lose their rankings in the UFC, so they refuse to fight him, and then it just becomes harder for Khamzat Chimaev to get fights. What did Zane say here? Thanks, bro. Make sure you subscribe to his MMA channel, best underrated channel on YouTube. That's right, my man. That's right. Yes. And by the way, this is a great segment into that because literally this is what this particular content in this live that I'm doing right now is literally about that. It's, yes, at the current moment, it is a very underrated channel from just starting it out really realistically a year ago, but really putting more work into it now within the past couple of months. It's a slow process, but I'm showing the world that this is what I can offer. Just like what I mentioned right now with what's going on with Khamzat Chimaev, right? It has a lot to do with public relations because the UFC is not telling you why he's not able to get fights, but at the same time, they don't want to tell you anything. It better they just leave it not explained and let you think whatever it is that you want to think, kind of like what the royal family does in the UK. And this is why shout out to Zane, who's from the UK. And we always talk about politics with our buddy over there and our mate, Michael Kelly, that crazy guy, always getting us into crazy political conversations. But the royal family in England has a motto that goes something to the extent of never complain, never explain, and never complain. Okay, so that's literally the approach that the UFC has done based on the fact that they're not explaining why Khamzat Chimaev is not fighting. Because then if you try to explain, guess what? It's going to ruin his image of being this boogeyman monster. But at the same time, if you go out and you explain, then you have to open up these can of worms of trying to explain his visa issues and how that ties into the war in Ukraine. And again, this is why I think that this particular war is one-sided to the side of the Ukrainians for obvious reasons, because they have the backing of Ukraine and Great Britain. And so, therefore, these Russian fighters are going to get the short end of the stick about it. Now, you look at Alexander Volkov. He's as Russian as they come, right? He is from Moscow, 6'7" Russian guy, UFC heavyweight fighter, right? How is it that he's able to get fights in the United States, Abu Dhabi, and Australia, and all these other NATO states? Well, the reason why is because he's just not tied to the dictators and the likes of Ramzan Kadyrov and Putin in the way that Khamzat is. Now, obviously, why is Khamzat tied to these people? Well, because of the fact that these people, the dictators, they want to be tied to Khamzat. So why would they not be? Khamzat is an absolute badass of a man. He goes out there and takes fights on short notice. And by the way, why are you not seeing him take fights now with this slow activity level that he has had in the past couple of months in comparison to the last couple of years? Well, because again, because of these issues that the UFC doesn't want to be forthright about. And why should they? So better what they do is, you know what, let's just get you out in Abu Dhabi. Paulo Costa has had experience fighting in Abu Dhabi. He's fought for the title out there. He knows what it's like to compete out there. Let's get Khamzat out there. It is a Muslim population. We're going to get an all-star Muslim card with the likes of Muhammad Makayev and then other guys that even Khamzat has fought in the past that's fighting in that card against Imavov, taking on, what is that guy? Ali Sakharov, I think. But he's another Chechnyan guy that Khamzat knocked out in Brave FC back in the Bahrain regional scenes before Khamzat got signed to the UFC. But nonetheless, yes, this is the reason why I love covering this sport, is because I can explain all of these things to you from a different angle. Now, if you want to go into, let's say, the technical aspect of mixed martial arts, I can delve into that as well. For one, you take a look at the way that Khamzat fights, right? What are some things that I've noticed about the way that he fights in comparison to, let's say, other fighters? Well, the Russian Sambo system is very unique in any other form of martial arts out there because they literally emphasize one thing, which is what? MMA in total, kicks and punches and takedowns all rolled in one. You look at Kamzat, the way that he came into the UFC, I believe it was a fight that he had with Reese McKee. How did he open the fight? He literally opened with a few head kicks, low kicks, and then he transitioned the low kick into a double leg takedown, right? Which is very unusual, right? Because usually, if you've ever took, like, let's say a basic MMA class at an MMA gym, one of the first things that they teach you is 1-2 punches and then shooting for a takedown. And then later on, they'll go for kicks and teach you all those other things. But if you're a Muay Thai gym or a Taekwondo kickboxing gym, they're going to go to kicks right away. But that's neither here or there. So the point of the matter is the way that they transition and put combinations together, it is literally mixed martial arts all rolled into one rather than the compository sports of MMA in its, let's say, in its singularity, right? The Russians and Chechens were able to combine Sambo, obviously, because it is their military form of fighting, into one form of fighting rather than trying to mix all things up. So Sambo is literally street fighting, military style fighting, all rolled into one. And Kamzat is a very great modern example of that. I mean, the guy has great kicks. He's got great power. Very underrated footwork, by the way, because of the way that he was able to circle GM3, if you notice in that 17 knockout that he got against him, right? It was just like one of those things where you never expect that he was going to close in on him like that. But once again, that's where a lot of the underrated footwork comes in, where a lot of people just don't really notice those small things. And by the way, speaking of footwork and boxing and things of that nature, how about this Francis Ngannou Tyson Fury fight? By the way, if you guys want to check out the video that I made concerning Tyson Fury and Usyk and why they're not fighting, the title is called Usyk is to blame for not fighting Fury. Here's why. So again, one of the reasons that I go into that was that I mentioned something to the effect that Usyk is just not a big draw. And in order for Tyson Fury to go in there and really take on a guy like this, okay, it has to be a little more than that. There has to be a little bit more incentives because there's just a lot of people out there in the world that are going to go and stream this fight illegally, not pay for it. So they want to make it worthwhile. So what does he do? He goes out and fights the lineal UFC heavyweight champion of the world, Francis Ngannou. And why does he do that? He does that because it is bigger money. But at the same time, does Tyson Fury want to be undisputed? I think a part of him does, and then a part of him doesn't care. And I think that's important to really point out. And again, this segments into why I love this sport so much, because not only am I just talking about the kicks and punches and the technical portions of the sport, now I'm going to go into the psychological portions of the sport, the lifestyle portions of how these fighters live. And this is one of the most intriguing ways that I love conveying combat sports to the world. So let's get into it. Tyson Fury has a little bit of a bipolar disorder. And why is that significant? Well, because like I said, there are some days where he's not going to bother with the idea of never being undisputed because he's already held all the belts. To him, in his mind, he's the lineal champion. He took the one belt that he never held before, which is the WBC. So in his mind, he is the undisputed champion, just not in the most official terms of having it all at once. Well, now he has an opportunity to do that against Usyk. The fact that he's bipolar and has these mood swings, okay, it is a type of Tyson Fury where you never know what you're going to get, but then there's going to be some days where he is going to sign up for this fight, and it's going to be the inevitability of, let's say, his potential downfall to, let's say, more of a superior opponent with higher technical skills and a greater understanding of all the technical aspects that come with boxing. Okay, but at the same time, he doesn't want to fight him because he just doesn't have the right notoriety. Now he goes in here and fights Francis. Guess what? Now he builds the fight even more. Now he builds the promotion with an even higher burden on his shoulders because now he's carried more of the promotion going into the Usyk fight after, let's say, he does beat Francis. Well, now he wants to take on Usyk because now that fight is even bigger, even after the Francis Ngannou performance and the notoriety that he got out of that, and the fact that they're going to go and follow Fury after that particular fight into the Usyk fight. I think that is the most plausible plan that Fury and his team may have in mind, but who knows? Again, it's all up in the air because that's just how Fury is as a person. He's just always up in the air, and you never know how he's going to decide one way or the other. So that's with that. So how about Canelo taking on Charlo this weekend? Here's something that I had noticed, right? I think there's a very strong similarity with Canelo and Israel Adesanya. And by the way, I'm going to make a separate video about this somewhere down the line, right? I think it's really important to convey this because Israel Adesanya was getting a lot of slack lately for losing to Sean Strickland. And again, we can name all the factors of the fact that he had this situation going on, he had this happening to him, he had too many fights, he just was not peaking correctly, and he runs across a guy with the wrong style at the wrong time and the wrong accumulation of rounds that Israel Adesanya has managed to put in his account over the years, right? You still can't forget the fact that this guy does everything that a hardcore fan wishes for out of their fighter, and Canelo is no different. He had that one slip up with Bivol. Well, then afterwards, Canelo came back and did what he needed to do. Then he had a fight with Triple G. Now here he is going back into it with a very competitive fight on paper, at least. Now on the fight of the night, on fight night, it's going to be a different story in that particular aspect. But on paper, it's an even fight. You got two guys that are undisputed, and they're going to clash, and they're going to get it on. Okay, two best guys in their respective division taking on each other, and then one guy moving up. And yeah, I mean, that's literally Canelo's career in a nutshell, right? Just fight after fight after fight, top competition after top competition. Yeah, for real. I'm definitely going to make a separate video on that particular topic at hand with Canelo and Izzy and their contribution to their activity that they were able to put out. Because guess what, man? You know, you can debate whether that activity is good one way or another. But the one thing I can tell you is that, you know, it does have its toll and its effect on you. But at the same time, it does build you a legacy that you can't deny. So those are some things that you can't deny Canelo and Izzy about. So I think I'm going to call it wraps on that one right here. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for those that have came and liked and subscribed. And I wanted to say, you know what? I'm thankful, even with just currently 85 subscribers. I'm very thankful for it. I think that's one of the things that I also wanted to give to the MMA content YouTube world is a bit of some gratitude, right? Whether it's just 85 people or 85,000, which eventually I will get to at some point, right? I mean, you just keep grinding, you keep doing it. Eventually, you're going to get the right amount of views, the right amount of subscribers. You just got to stick and grind to it, and people will eventually see your talent for exactly what it is. But nonetheless, that's one of the things I can offer is gratitude. I'm always going to appreciate the smallest things, the smallest comments, the smallest likes. But once you get bigger and you get a little bit more views, maybe that's another story. But that's neither here or there. So once again, this is what I can offer to the mixed martial arts YouTube world and combat sports in general in terms of covering the sport and my knowledge and experience and the likes of characters that I've ran across from around the world regarding mixed martial arts and the people that are involved in it and their interesting stories that I'd like to convey to the world. Thank you once again, and don't forget to like and subscribe.